Okay, you are live.
All right, good morning. Just want to welcome everybody to the first zoning committee meeting. It's Friday, March 26, 2021, 11 a.m. First agenda item is roll call. So we have Jennifer Ostinger, City Clerk, Lindsay Morrow, City Clerk, Samantha Turner, Third Ward Councilwoman, Nick Osterly, Economic Development, Chief of Staff, Anita Davis, Ward Councilwoman, Dana Lance, Sharon Woodbury, Economic Development, Aaron Bishop, Jimmy Hughes, Nick Cretion, Hunter Morrison, Mike Durkin, Basha Adamzak. I get everybody? All right, so second agenda item is new business, and we're going to be discussing process of various zoning applications as well as section 505, 17, keeping and maintaining wild animals and livestock. So I think Nikki, you're up first.
Thank you, Councilman. Through the chair. Regarding the zoning information that was sent up for legislation request, it was a request for zone change from mixed use to an industrial green. What we're doing in the CPED department is pulling together we pulled together a land assembly team, which consists of our department, Economic Action Group, our planning consultant, as well as Mahoning County Land Bank, YSU, and YNDC. What we're looking to do is target areas in the city where there's a lot of delinquent land, tax delinquent land, city-owned land, and land bank land that we can pull together to assemble for our housing strategy for residential as well as for commercial and industrial business use. So what I wanted to do this morning was to kind of give you an overview of that process, how it works. Sharon's going to talk about some of the inquiries that we get. Nick has a small PowerPoint slide with maps on it that we want to be able to present, and Hunter's going to talk about some planning strategies, if that's okay.
Good, let's go.
Okay, Sharon.
Through the chair, thank you for this opportunity to advance this discussion on zoning. So I just wanted to give the group a background on how the city will receive leads on different projects that are coming in, and some data on why we feel it's important for us to respond in the manner that we're proposing. So as far as leads that are coming in, typically when we're talking about companies of substantial size, particularly those that are not located in Ohio, but have identified Ohio as a target area. They work through the state of Ohio in locating a site. We will get a notification of a lead, and those leads come in sometimes 2 or 3 at a time during the week. Sometimes we'll go through a period of time where they're not quite so frequent, but there is a very quick turnaround time on those leads when they come in. So what we're seeing as far as the requests that are coming in and looking at the data, there is a huge demand for projects that are looking to site parcels that are 20 acres or more. It is a priority that we're getting coming from the state of Ohio, Jobs Ohio being their arm for economic development. And the state is prioritizing sites of that size in order for us to be major players when it comes to projects that are coming in. So for example, in 2020, out of a total of 43 leads, 23 leads were for some type of existing building. But the remaining 20 leads, one of them was for a 10-acre site. The remaining 19 requests were for 20 acres or more. So that gives you some perspective of how we need to be a player in this, and we need to be able to provide sites to meet that demand. So as we've gotten our requests in, we've identified that the Albert Street site, which is kind of the name that we have given it in terms of being able to refer to it, that's the only site right now that we can refer regularly as a potential site for these projects. The problem is that it's not zoned correctly. And when we're dealing with projects that are coming in, just like the leads have to be returned and we get back to them in sometimes 3 days, sometimes 7 days, it's about quick response, speed of business. We have to respond quickly on those leads, and we have to be ready for those projects to be site ready for those businesses. It's not ready if it's not zoned correctly. They will pass up this property and go to something that has less hair on it and is less involved. So I reached out and talked to our planning team, our land assembly team, and we started looking at where we could begin to assemble sites and where it made sense to revisit zoning. So this one has bubbled to the surface because of the frequency of these leads that are coming in. There are 20 acres plus. This is an easily assembled site because we're talking about two owners, the City of Youngstown and the Board of Education. Some of these are going to be a lot more challenging because we have numerous parcels. There may be 10 or 15 to make up a site, and then we're talking about owners that could be as much as 10 or 15. When we've got a site such as this one where there are only two owners, there's an ease of assembly and we can move quickly on these projects. So that's a bit of a background and something that I just think it's important for the committee to understand in terms of our process. I saw that we had a screenshot of what one of those leads looked like. And as they come in, typically we'll get what type of industry it is, the amount of acreage that they have, if they have any requirements for utilities or proximity to highways. So we are basically filtering through that list to see what checks those boxes and what sites that we have can forward. But as you see, we get some project information in terms of the characteristics of the site, and we respond with that. They're not contacting or working with the city directly just yet until something advanced further.
Thank you for that, Sharon. Have we missed any opportunities because basically we don't have the land assembled already? And why is it taking so long to get a plan together to start assembling land? I think that's something we've been discussing for 5 years or more.
So we don't always get a reason for why the city is passed up on a particular site. We have been fortunate enough that we've got a site that we can put into play. So we haven't caught a fish yet in terms of getting a project there. But this is us being proactive and having it ready to go. So we've still been able to provide this site. I just don't want the city to be caught in a scenario where we've got a project, they're ready to go, and we're going back and forth with zoning, questioning whether we want to zone this appropriately or not zoned this appropriately. I think we saw that with some of the properties in Lordstown. And that I don't think that's the sentiment that we want to convey to businesses. So this purpose is for us to be ready to go. It's not necessarily assembly of a site this time, it's just having it zoned.
Thank you for that, Sharon. Anybody had any questions about that? So as far as the various zoning changes that are in this particular piece for this meeting, there are a lot of different sites spread out. Some of them appear to be very small. Is there any particular reason for these different various sites, or are companies looking for places to go in these particular areas, or this is just to be prepared? I know that there was some interest in the site with the Board of Education and the city's property combined, but as far as the other locations, what are we doing with those?
Through the chair, if we can move forward in our presentation, Nick has some slides to show you the maps and some of the targets that we're doing with the strategic planning that we started doing last year.
Thank you, Nick.
you just want me to run through it, Nikki, and kind of talk through things? And
Yeah, these are our partners that I spoke about earlier, and then we can move on into your slide deck.
Yep. So a lot of these planning efforts, it's all based on previous plans, whether it's the neighborhood action plans, YSU's strategic economic development plan, commercial corridor analysis, or Youngstown 2010, which is really the godfather of all this in terms of setting the zoning strategy and the smart shrinkage policy, as well as the downtown vision and action plan. In terms of the commercial perspective, we look at commercial cores each individually on a variety of factors, but also what is possible in terms of tax delinquency, vacancy, and abandonment that could be assembled in terms of small scale commercial redevelopment. On the residential side of things, these are the neighborhood action team areas that neighborhood action plans have been put together. We see this come to fruition where land assembly has actually resulted in the redevelopment and construction on Helena. And as additional residential structures are torn down, there's that opportunity in residential areas for land assembly to take place, and even new construction potentially as the market continues to be able to bear more residential units.
Nick, can you also send this presentation to our city clerk, Valencia, so she has it on file?
I'll share this and make sure everyone has access to it.
Thank you. I'm going to add that Councilman Mike Ray has also joined the meeting.
And then kind of getting to the point of this discussion, I guess, in terms of larger assemblies or industrial sites, Nikki spoke to, and I showed the screenshot of the email that the site guidelines, they come with very specific information they're looking for in terms of location, acreage, access, utilities, the market area in some cases in terms of putting a circle around an area in terms of the total market area around it. And we'll package those sites oftentimes in a little slide like this and send it off. But it is critical sometimes to have that assembly in place ahead of time. And we've identified different areas across the city that it's not all going to be industrial parks, it's not all going to be industry, but there are areas or nodes of opportunity that we can begin to start picking off and zoning appropriately for what the future use could or should be. And we see from parkland at McKelvey Lake to potential green industrial that we've discussed, to school and parks that could potentially bear more development around those areas. Specifically talking to this opportunity on the neighborhood scale, we see two sites that could potentially be redeveloped, with both the Albert Street site, which we've referred to, and McGuffey Plaza in the adjacent land that had been assembled for the freeway potential expressway expansion that never happened. But it certainly leads to opportunities for assembly, which is really the key. And taking a look site specifically, we see ownership, and having that common City of Youngstown or Board of Education ownership makes everyone's life real easy when putting sites like this together. And then looking at the other perspective of zoning, when you have the common ownership, this instance specifically is just extending the industrial green district that is already in existence, not spot zoning or putting anything random, but just aligning with the adjacent uses, I guess, of the adjacent properties, and just trying to create more opportunities for this development to take place when opportunities like this do arise, and it allows us to be proactive in those opportunities. This is all I have in terms of slides. I'd be happy to go back to any specific one, but just kind of outlining the big picture in terms of residential, commercial, and industrial, or the large sites, and how that goes from specific assembly to the zoning level, which is really critical when we're approached by the chamber or whoever it might be with shovel-ready projects, and we just have to be ready to address them.
Through the chair, if I may add, this gives us thank you. This gives us an opportunity from what we're used to doing is responding to these requests or not. Now we want to be able to market what we have. We want to be able to already have it ready and not wait for those requests to come in. We want to be site ready so that we can have it on our website and we can start marketing in our conversations our land that we have available, whether it be commercial, industrial, or residential. So this just gives us a step ahead of where we've historically been.
Other than
Chair, can I also add to that?
Chair.
Just to further expand on the marketing component that Nikki was talking about, I mentioned earlier that there is a priority coming from the state in terms of being able to identify these parcels that are 20 acres. 30 acres is actually a better starting point for us. So in following with that, there is a particular program that the state of Ohio has developed that's called Site Ohio. And we've got an opportunity to opt in sites that we have. And there will be a team of professionals that will go through that site and let you know everything that needs to be done to make that site marketable. They will help you market it. And it can go two paths. They can certify that site as a development ready site, or they can put it into another category where they've evaluated it and have helped the city determine what's the highest and best use for those properties. It has to be 30 acres, and even in order for us to even advance it and opt in to the sites. So that gives you a picture of why it's important for us to be able to move on sites like this.
Thank you. So I can imagine that we don't exactly own all of these properties. So what's the projected cost of acquiring these properties and basically putting together the land that we need to be able to meet the needs that the state and the regional chamber are talking about? I mean, are we already in contact with the school board to acquire their property, and how much is that going to cost, as well as the rest of the properties that we need to pull in?
Through the chair, we have had conversations. I've talked to Mr. Shad, who's the president of the Board of Education, about our interest in the site that the school has control over. I believe the best way for us to approach this right now is to get an option on the property. So that's what I've been discussing with them. The city doesn't have to commit a full purchase price on a site. We can just negotiate an option where for a period of time, when we set what that term is, we can act immediately and acquire a site if there is a project that comes online. So basically we negotiate everything up front. There's not some decision making that still has to happen when the company is there and ready to move. We will already have had all those discussions, negotiated everything without paying a full purchase price. We just have an option to purchase, and it allows us to move quickly if that's the case. And that gives us an opportunity to step in. Sometimes we don't have to. It's good for us to have parcels assembled, but there are certain plays where we probably won't be able to step in as the ownership. I've had conversations with the owner of Lansdowne Airport because of the number of acreage that they have. Right now, that's owned by multiple owners. They're trying to work through what direction they want to go with that. And that might be an instance where they want to sell directly because they've got a broker that's involved. But by securing options where we can, that makes it a much more streamlined process. They're dealing with the city and we can move quickly. So the option doesn't, I'm sorry, that was in response to you asking as far as how much we have to commit in dollars. We need to get appraisals on those properties, but the option allows us to not be stagnant and to have a path moving forward without the investment that you're talking about just yet.
Okay, thank you for that. Anita, I see your hand. Say something real quick. The process of changing these zonings codes, how is that going to affect the residents that live around? Is it going to be any change in quality of life, property values, or anything of the sort? And do we have a plan so things don't happen like Chilcan, to be able to notify, the community around these properties ahead of time?
Through the chair, I do have Laura Fulmer on, but we do notify prior to any zone change requests. We have to notify the surrounding neighbors And that way they can come to the meeting to either support the zone change or be in opposition of it. So there is a notification process. But Laura can speak a little more to that. Laura, are you on?
Let me let Nita ask her question first.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. I just have a question because I'm really not familiar with this Albert Street site. Where exactly is that on Albert in relation to like the old, where exactly is that? On Albert Street.
Through the chair, we're looking at the intersection of Albert and it's bound by Albert, Republic, and Kimmel. I think Atkinson might be the one furthest east in terms of bounding the property. It is almost directly across the street from the former Aeroquip site that the city owns.
Okay, thank you. And you say, and part of that is the school board?
Through the chair, that's correct. The site that we've got highlighted as Albert Street, it's just currently owned by the city of Youngstown and the school board.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Laura? Laura, go ahead. I think Laura may be having some technical difficulties. Is she still on?
Through the chair, I have a question. Can you guys hear me? I think I'm clear.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to, just so I can get clarity, there is a state program. Sharon, what was the name of that program again, please?
Site Ohio.
Site Ohio. And with that, the city or the municipality has pulls together 30 acres. And at that point, they'll come in and inspect and make sure the site is shovel ready in case there's development that comes through the state channel.
Correct. So we will get information that the city can use if it comes through the state, or if we have someone who wants to work directly with the city and they're not going through the state of Ohio. It just tees us up for the project, doing any type of environmentals that are needed, engineering studies, and a market study as well.
Okay, and then I know that you showed us Albert Street. How many sites have you identified already that for this potential across the city, or have we just seen this one right now?
There are 3 sites that we've opted in, and that includes the Albert Street site. There is a property on Poland Avenue that's right off of Center Street Bridge that's about 70 acres, which we refer to as the Sherman International site. And then the Lansdowne property. So those 3.
And my final question is, we don't have to have complete ownership of all the sites in order to opt into the state program. We can pursue an option to purchase in the event development opportunity presents itself. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that clarity.
So Sharon, in the process of doing this, I know there's a site that's very important to our East Side residents. I know in particular Jimmy and myself being the councilman over there, and that's the McGuffey Plaza site. Are there any plans for developing that property? Are we working with the owners of that property? Because right now it's just a huge eyesore and everybody's wondering what's going on with it.
So through the chair, I know that we got a chance to look at several maps, and the McGuffey Mall site was one of the properties that we identified because of the amount of acreage, again, publicly owned parcels as well. There's the private owner, but also there is some additional school board property that's adjacent to that to help make that a large footprint for development. We are looking at what are the best uses for that. So we have had discussion about whether it makes sense to look at that in an area of industrial green. We don't want to rule out retail and bringing back something similar to what was there before. So on another track, we are working with Retail Strategies, and we talked about that company, I think in the first quarter of this year in January, when we were talking about some of our initiatives that are going on. We've had lengthy conversations about McGuffey Mall and prioritizing that as a site where they will do that market analysis and help us to identify, based on the data, what would be a good fit for those properties. So we have not landed on any particular end use, but it is certainly in our sights, and one that we are fully running up the flagpole and trying to find out what's the best end use for that property.
Thank you. Nita, you had another question?
Yes, to the chair. So on this, the Site Ohio, the service that the state has, what is the cost on that? Is there a cost for them to come in and do the assessment?
Through the chair, the cost would go to the state of Ohio. There is no cost to the city for this.
Like that.
I do too.
Sharon, I think right now would probably be the perfect time to revisit that plan I presented to economic development in the administration years ago, as far as the east side go. The conversation we had with Vince, the man from National League of Cities, about redeveloping housing projects and then adding basically a retail component to that as well. Are we in touch with him anymore to produce the same results as they did in Watt's projects?
Through the chair. So I have not had any further conversations. That's going to be a team approach, particularly with this being largely residential and falling in our community development and planning area. I will certainly be at the table to talk about the commercial development aspect of it. And I think that the steps that we're taking now will really help position us for those conversations, because we'll have more information and data to act on.
Well, I'd greatly appreciate if somebody from the administration can reach back out and start that conversation with that corporation again. Did you guys have a present? So basically at this point, we're assembling these. Was somebody trying to talk?
I'm sorry. One more question through the chair.
Samantha?
Yes, I just wanted to ask, those three funds that, the three sites you have, does any of them work to getting them shovel ready? Are any of them eligible for brownfield funding through the state to help us get where we're going? I'm thinking about, I know when McGuffey Mall was not included, but it seems as though that might be a place where we might be able to get some assistance in making it ready. So I just want to know if that's a part of the conversation as well, and how we get it shovel ready and that cost.
Through the chair.
Sharon?
We did not choose to opt in the McGuffey Mall site because they do not allow retail. This is purely a industrial, commercial end use, and retail is not an eligible end use for that assessment. As in terms of moving forward with that and being able to tap into dollars, it would still qualify for funding. There are a number of programs that the state has set up to help with this, and the Site Ohio being an example for industrial. They do shy away from retail. I think if we have a story to tell and we talk about the impact, that there is an avenue for us to be able to tap into dollars. It may not be for the cleanup, but it may help us with some other things that it's more of a negotiation in terms of what type of funding they will put to a site when we're talking about retail. But in the general sense of brownfield, there are a number of programs that we will be able to tap into. If it's not retail, it's a more straightforward process, and there are funds that we can tap into to help address any contamination and environmental issues and making those those sites ready.
And one more just follow up. So do you have for the site on Albert that we just saw, is there any additional cost aside from land collection that we foresee could come up right now? Like, is that, or are we waiting to get to a point to bring the state in to do a look, to do their survey and then let us know we should do XYZ? Or do we kind of have an idea of the cost involved?
Through the chair. So we went through the steps of having the city-owned property, having an environmental assessment done. We got the phase 2 done on that property. We don't have a phase 2 on the Board of Education property. So we've taken some initial steps with that. It really is a function of what we get back from the state. That you're absolutely right, Councilwoman Turner, in terms of what that investment looks like, if there's an investment, the dollar amount. And I think that we've gotten a lot of support from the state of Ohio in trying to address that. So that's certainly they expect that to be the next conversation once we've gotten through the assessment stage.
And so I'm
Thank you.
very happy to hear that we're making plans for future development and hopefully immediately development. Do we have a presentation or educational piece so we can basically have a better understanding of why certain parts of the city are zoned the way that they are? What is that for? What do certain zoning codes mean? Why can you have group homes automatically in certain parts of the city but not in others? And ultimately, how does our zoning in our city affect future development?
Through the chair, we have Hunter on from a planning perspective to kind of give you an overview of zoning and why certain things are zoned and what our strategy is going forward with the current zoning code.
Hunter? You're muted, Hunter.
Thank you, through the chair. Good sound zoning is based on having a good and up-to-date plan. So we really need to start back with the 2010 plan, which was done 2005, 2006, with an enormous amount of public involvement, about 1,500 people showing up at Stambaugh Auditorium to look at the vision and approve that, and then about 1,300 2 years later to view the plan, the actual general plan of the city of Youngstown. That's 2010. That includes identifying areas for residential, commercial, and industrial. We introduced the idea at that time of something called green industrial, with incentives for businesses to locate there. It's a version of light industrial, and a lot of the industrial valley along the river, along Crab Creek in particular, we propose to change the zoning from unrestricted industry, i.e. the mills, to a lighter industry that would be compatible with the residential. The next stage in that was actually to update the city's zoning code, and that was done probably about 5 years ago. This is the development code of the city of Youngstown, which has two components, the code and the map. The map closely reflects the recommendations that were made by the community about the types of zoning that belong and types of uses that belong in different places. And the code itself specified those and uses and the characteristics of them and what is appropriate and not appropriate. With regard to green industrial, the specific requirements for screening and the like to protect the surrounding residential areas. The map reflects the judgment of council and the administration at the time it was adopted as to what uses belong where. In the case of the Albert Street property, the decision was at that point made that this should be residential, and there was a school in place at the time. I think what we're seeing is that there isn't a demand in that location for residential so much as there's an opportunity for job creation along Albert Street by extending the green industrial, which is on the west side across to the east side. But basically, we're trying to, the plan closely follows the zoning map and code closely follow the general plan of the city of Youngstown. When we get down to specifics, issues of group homes and the like, there are issues of constitutionality and access and equity that are really judgment calls that need to be thought through. But the broad picture of where the city's headed is defined by the 2010 general plan and the zoning code and map. And I think one of the things the city should be very proud of is that these are up to date. And many cities don't have up-to-date plans and codes that moving forward. So as we have been working with Sharon and her team, Nick, Economic Action Group, we've been looking specifically at those areas that we identified for green industrial, where some site assembly may be required to get to that 30-acre parcel size that would be of interest. So we've looked all along the river, Mahoning River, the sites we've already assembled in the past, what can be done there. Looked along Crab Creek and Andrews Avenue on Logan. And Wick, and then also looked along the Albert Garland Street area, which starts down at Himrod and moves north, where we see some opportunity because of the freeway accessibility over time to assemble parcels. This one happens to be the lowest hanging fruit in terms of the city owning about half of it already, and another governmental entity owning the other half. And as Nikki pointed out, most of the other sites require a much heavier lift in terms of assembly if they were to be used for industrial purposes. So I think one of the final points I want to make is that the message we've gotten from the state of Ohio and from the chamber and from the industrial brokerage community is speed, scale, and site requirements. You have to be able to find a site that meets the requirements of the market, has a scale and location that's attractive, and do it in a timely manner. And I can't emphasize as much as possible. The timeliness is key. The market doesn't have a lot of time. They're searching sites to wait for an assembly. So it's in our interest to work through the sites we already have that Sharon has identified, and then identify others that could meet those requirements and work through the details of those.
So Hunter, if you look back decades ago in the city, like before my time, the city seemed to be zoned in a way where it was like a perfect mixture of business and residential. You could find everything you need within neighborhoods as you go throughout the city on each side of town. Is the city adequately and equally zoned now for future growth?
Through the chair, I believe it is. I think one of the issues, particularly on East Side retail, is that the commercial market appears to have collapsed. But as we looked at it, and that's one of the roles we're asking retail strategists to help us with, we think there's a latent demand. There are several places in the city of Youngstown where groceries have left, other retail has left, and people remain behind. And my own experience over the years has been, when you can identify that latent demand, can you identify what's known as leakage, or people, say on the east side, that come up and were previously served by McGuffey Plaza, are shopping now at Walmart, or they're shopping outside the neighbor in some other place. They're not shopping nowhere. The money is leaking out of the city of Youngstown to the suburbs. That's the opportunity we have. And at some point in time, I'd be glad to point out the shopping centers I got involved in developing in Cleveland around the concept of capturing the leakage and bringing it back into the neighborhood. But we have to make the case in dollars and cents to investors and into operators that they can make money in a Youngstown neighborhood because there are people here in our community who have retail needs and want to shop close to home. And that's one of the roles that we've tasked retail strategies to help us identify those places where there's money left on the table where people are shopping outside their community because they need to eat, they need to shop, and we can't meet that right now. We're going to bring the market back to the community on a dollars and cents basis, and I think we can do it.
Have we streamlined our process of changing zoning at all? I know for us as a city, it's a little easier, you know, just like Nikki submitted the legislation to change the zoning. It seems to be a lot harder for, you know, a business owner or even a average citizen to come and request a zone change. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. It takes a lot of time. Are we in the process at all of streamlining that process to make it easier?
I think we are, and part of it is having regular, predictable meetings and working closely with council on that. The issue with zoning also is one of due process. So many of the steps that are there are steps put in procedurally to make sure that citizens have an opportunity. There are 2 public hearings, and that's not to delay things, even though it has the function of spreading the process out so much as to enable affected property owners to learn about the project and to come forward. And frankly, I think the fact that we're doing more of these meetings on Zoom has meant that people can participate in the meetings without having to take a day off work or half a day off work and come downtown, and can make their opinions known. But a lot of the delays that are baked into it are baked into now to protect abutting property owners from learning about something word of mouth. They need to be notified. Time needs to be set. It's convenient, and then people need to be heard. And they're heard before the Planning Commission, and they're heard before the council. And so you, as the council representatives who ultimately have to pass on the zoning, know that you're doing it with full knowledge of the constituents of what's going on.
And
I
through
think
the
it's going
chair,
to be very important to continue to have these zoning meetings moving forward. Nikki?
yes, through the chair, we did start looking at, it's particularly with this, because we wanted to try to turn it around quicker than we were hoping for. But we did start looking at some redundancy just in our process of, how we get the request to council, to get the request on the meeting, to get it back. So this is something that we do want to work closely with council in the entire process to see how we can eliminate and remove some of the redundancies. And just keeping in mind that we understand that a lot of these processes were put in place prior to technology, prior to Zoom, and a lot of it's procedural. So as many of those things that we can eliminate in the front end will help definitely, get things done quicker. And Councilman, for yourself, we'll be working with a prospective business owner for months just to get something before the zoning, planning and zoning committee. So we definitely want to work together and just, maybe have a meeting and we could just look at process and how can we streamline some of those things. Thank you.
I think, as always, the old adage, an informed council is a cooperative council. So the more information we have, the better we can make decisions. It's all about information. I think we can probably at this point segue into our second bullet point.
Question?
Nita?
Yes, through the chair. As you talk about redundancy and the process and everything else, how much time was spent on the chill can plant project prior to being brought to council? If any of you, some of you weren't there, but some of you were. So how much time was spent on that?
Who's your question to, Nita?
I said, how much time was spent in preparation for the chill can plant project prior to it being brought to council?
Sharon, did you want to answer that?
I'm trying to recall. I can't with any confidence give you a particular time frame. There were a number of steps certainly that were different in that process because we had to go through an urban renewal plan for that, which is a lot more lengthy than when we're just talking about a zoning change. And so there were a number of conversations that we had just on that component of it. I'm going to take a guess and say it was probably 6 months before we got to a project that we were funding. I'm just taking a guess at it though.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I know the chill can was probably one of the first things we were hit with when we first came on council. That was 2016. And I know you guys were planning that before we even got on council because the land had to be assembled. So by the time it was, I mean, that was kind of the first initial hearing of it was kind of immediate soon as we got on council in 2016. The entire plan for it really wasn't heard until later on down the line. Anybody else have any more questions about that? I don't know how much we want to discuss chill can. So I think at this point we can segue into our bullet point number 2. Who basically comes up with, and I've heard all the explanation, but who basically comes up with how you can allow certain things to happen in certain neighborhoods according to zoning, but not in other neighborhoods according to zoning? Is that more of a popularity of opinions for the residents or for city leaders, particularly when it comes to livestock and having things like chickens in neighborhoods? I know when I first got council, one of the first decisions I made was allow the family to have chickens on the east side, and I got almost tarred and feathered.
It seems as though Councilman Oliver has frozen, so we can move into that section. Aaron, did you want to begin with giving us an overview of how that looks in relation to public health and your process?
Sure. So, since I've been here, it has been a part of the city ordinance under 505.17, keeping and maintaining wild animals and livestock. And so it just kind of goes through the animals that you cannot have, and it lists everything you can imagine: bears, cheetahs, jaguars. So if you look through the list, and then what they do is, so they can't have that. And then when they want to maintain or keep any of the animals other than those listed in the subsection, they must request that his or her property be inspected by the health commissioner. And so, what we've been doing is going out and inspecting the property to make sure that, they have what is needed to have the chickens or livestock that they choose. And then we have our recommendations that we have followed along. And so this is really the recommendations: that they can't have more than 8 hens. They're not allowed to have roosters. They can't have free roaming chickens. They have to be confined into a fenced area or a hen house. They also everything has to be clean, dry, odor-free, neat, sanitary conditions. And basically, why the health department, I just was asking some people from history for the history around the health department, was really for the cleanliness and to keep the rat harbors down, because people that were, having chickens and whatnot, their wastes were just kind of hanging out, and it breeds rats. The rats come and they, eat the feces and whatnot. So that was pretty much the reason that the health department even got involved. And again, what we do is just go out and inspect. And I know it used to be a longer process. We would go door to door and ask the neighbors, if this is what they wanted. We no longer do that. But, as long as that they are following the guidelines that we have set out for them, we do approve it, send it to zoning, our recommendation. And again, this is something, like I said, it's in the ordinance. We don't necessarily have to do that. And I don't know, like I said, it's been there a long time. But if that's something that, you just want to leave with zoning and, we would just go out if we had complaints. I'm okay with that too. It's just kind of what, everyone else kind of thinks on that.
Nita?
To the chair, yes. The reason why I asked that this be placed on the agenda is because of a couple of zoning meetings that I was part of. And a request that was made for chickens, of course, and it was in the backyard. And there was enough division of opinions amongst the residents. It was a 12-12 support and opposition to the zoning for the permit to be issued. And I thought it was something that council as a group should take part in the discussion. I have done some research, and I'm sure some other members of council have done research as well, where there are cities that have allowed the chickens to come in through a committee like Hunter would have. And there are other cities that ban them totally. Places like Elyria, which doesn't allow chickens at all. But there are places like Seattle, Washington, and I was referred to Seattle, Washington's code that said that they would allow chickens in a residential neighborhood, so long as there was, and I thought that the limitation that they set was fairly reasonable. In Seattle, which is a very, progressive city, so long as there's 25 feet from the property line and any permanent structure on the lot, on the property, 25 feet all the way around, they allow chickens, but not roosters. So that's 25 feet from the coop all the way around. And I think that's pretty generous, because even though we want to allow people some liberty, we do have a lot of postage stamps lots on the south side, whereas the east side and the north side, they have some massive properties with a lot of space. And I think we should consider allowing them.
I think we guys got to be a little careful about, before I get the mic, a little careful about saying we'll allow chickens in certain parts of the city or sides of town, and then saying we won't in others, because I think it kind of sends a message to residents like, why, what do you think about us to allow livestock in our neighborhoods, but you won't allow it in their neighborhood? So it's kind of like a fine line we got to walk. Mike Ray.
Thank you, through the chair. I guess this is maybe a question for Hunter or zoning. It's my understanding how the chickens are in our code is a conditional use. And when we have a conditional use, it means you meet the conditions to allow said use. If you fail to meet said conditions, that conditional use can be taken away from you. So if you have chickens, you get approval, and you end up with roosters and chickens all over the yard and places, then the city can revoke that privilege of having those chickens. Could you, Hunter, is that a correct assessment or interpretation? Am I understanding that correctly?
Through the chair, that it is a conditional use. It's spelled out in chapter 1103.02 with regard to small livestock, poultry, rabbits, and bees. It's a broad across the board. You can have these as a conditional use. What is not spelled out in the code is whether there's a difference created in a place, a neighborhood that has small lots or large lots, or small lots but it's largely abandoned lots, as opposed to small lots where the housing is all in place. We have no grounds by which to say, this particular street is one that can accommodate this livestock, and some other street is not, based on not on what side of town it is, but on the geometry of the parcel. And what I think Councilman Davis is talking about is setback requirements that might be sure that, or ensure that lots that are too small would be deemed ineligible. Right now, what happens is the applicant comes to the Planning Commission and may make a very sound presentation about how he or she intends to proceed, what it will look like, and meeting all the requirements, no roosters, et cetera, meeting the health requirements. Planning Commission passes on it, but there's neighborhood objections that the council person is aware of, and ultimately the council person has to sign off on this. So I think Planning Commission is kind of in a difficult position, not quite knowing whether, we don't have clear guidance as to what, within the context of the city, what blocks may be more or less appropriate. When we've heard the lower density parts of town less of an issue than the higher density parts of town. But again, we don't have any guidance from council to say, here's your minimum lot size or your minimum setback size. And if you can't meet that, you can't come before us. So we certainly would appreciate some guidance from council, because right now I think we're not necessarily on the same page in terms of how we are responding to an applicant and who's making a good faith effort to meet all the current requirements.
Mike,
I have a follow-up. Yeah, thank you, Hunter. My just concern is, if you meet the conditions, say we do apply the setbacks or the requirements as you specified. I mean, I don't feel like we should have chicken court, or if a council person deems worthy of chickens, we make a chicken ruling and we have chicken lobbies, lobbying us for chickens. It's a little silly. I mean, either you get chickens or you're not, or if you get along with your neighbors, you can have chickens or you can't. I mean, if it's safe and healthy and reasonable and it meets the zoning requirements, have chickens. If you break the chicken rules, you get your chicken privileges revoked. I mean, that's I think that's my view of how that system should be working. But I think you also said we need an additional layer to make that work better.
Nita?
Yes, through the chair. So Hunter, if we put into the legislation a minimum, like I mentioned, the 25 to 30 feet kind of thing, would that give you the kind of guidance that you would need? Because even though, and I'm in agreement with Councilman Oliver that no, it's not about making our certain neighborhoods more minimal or more sides of town. But the truth of the matter is that the east side, it does have a lot of empty land. But here on the south side, and yours and my wards, we have, I call them postage stamp lots. They're 50, 75 feet and things like that. And probably if we use a 25 or 30 feet as kind of setback all the way around, most of in our neighborhoods, they wouldn't even meet that requirement to have that kind of usage. But so I would like to give Hunter some sort of guidance as to which way we want him to proceed.
And before you speak, are we looking to make an overall decision on allowing chickens or not throughout the entire city, or leaving the legislation as it stands and picking places where it could go? Like, for instance, in an area where there's development, and such as Mahoning Avenue, where in that last meeting chickens were not allowed, as opposed to Handel's neighborhood, where it seemed that the decision would have went to allow. How do we make that decision to say whether or not we're going to do that? Do we not allow chickens where there's businesses, or so that's a little bit of clarity I need on that too as well. Hunter?
Well, through the chair, currently the sort of livestock is permitted as a conditional use everywhere. I think the Planning Commission is well familiar with setback requirements, and that's pretty straightforward to the judge. we'd have to look at that. I have not done a layout to see what that would mean on different neighborhoods, but we use setback requirements to deal with fire safety issues and similar concerns, and being able to access buildings. I think we could certainly look at a setback requirement or a minimum lot size is another way to look at it, that a lot has to be X number of square feet for it to be permitted to have a live animal agricultural use. You can have a hoop house, but you can't have chickens unless your lot is large enough, and that may be a square footage question. I'd certainly want to get guidance from the council as to, I think everybody's looked and said the east side's got a lot of land, but there are other parts of the city which don't. And one way to get at that would be it's conditional and permitted only in lots above X square feet. And again, that's something that's can be rationally administered.
Dana, I see your hand up. Before you talk, Dana, 1 second. I think we need to discuss as well, what's the overall issue with wild chickens or not? I mean, because we got animals all over the city, all kind of animals. Like my problem downtown is dogs pooping all over the square and owners not cleaning up after them. So I think that's kind of even a little bit dirtier than chickens, you know what I mean? So it's like, what's the conversation we really having here? Like, or what's the reason for not allowing or allowing chickens is kind of my question. Dana?
If I can, through the chair, thank you, Councilman Oliver. Getting back to Youngstown Codified Ordinance 50517, Health Commissioner Bishop was accurate in her authority to determine and inspect as it relates to chickens and whether or not that is appropriate. What I need to point out to council and what conflicts with what Hunter listed under the zoning code is that under 5B on 50517, after they get the report from the health commissioner, they submit that to the city planning commission. This ordinance specifically then lays out a 3-pronged test to determine whether or not chickens are appropriate. It says, if the city planning commission determines that the property where the animals are to be kept is zoned for farming or agricultural purposes, and that the animals are intended to be used for farming and agricultural purposes, and that the issuance of the permit will not interfere with the health and safety of the community or create a nuisance to adjoining landowners, it shall recommend the issuance of a permit allowing the keeping of animals to the extent that they are kept in compliance with all the criteria set forth in the health commissioner's report to city council. City council may then consent to the issuance of the permit by ordinance. So in the reading of this ordinance, they can only be on places that are zoned farming and agricultural. Now, this ordinance was passed in 2009. I was not a party to that and don't know what the intent was, but that is how it reads. And it conflicts with
zoning code.
The zoning code. So regardless of what is happening, we have to clean up either the zoning code or the ordinance or both to reflect what city council wants, because you, city council, are the legislators. So we have to determine what we want and probably do that relatively quickly so that we clear up all of this confusion.
Thank you, Dana. So according to our own code, resident can't apply to have chickens simply to get fresh eggs.
According to our codified ordinances under Chapter 5, which is our prohibitive section, it's basically our criminal section of the code. That is correct. However, our zoning code allows for, I believe Mr. Morrison said, the conditional use permit. So there's clearly a conflict between the two, and we have to sort out what we want that to be. And when I say we, it's council acting legislatively at the will of their constituents. So we'd be happy to help draft whatever those parameters are. Or we could simply remove this section from the revised code, or pardon me, from the city codified ordinances, delete it and incorporate some requirements into the zoning code. The importance of having this in the code previously was that there were enforcement mechanisms that could be issued by a citation, by code enforcement, by the police department, and the like, rather than just a zoning enforcement. But those are all things to be considered in drafting the ordinance, but some sort of clarification needs to be drafted.
I think it makes sense just to go stick with the code that we got. Anita?
Yes, through the chair. So Dana, so far as
Yes.
enforcement wise, by having it under the criminal code, we could take action if there was a problem, action could be taken more quickly than under the zoning thing, because is that right or wrong?
That is correct. So the penalty in this section is actually prescribed. And it says that anybody that violates this section is guilty of a misdemeanor of the first degree, which is punishable by 6 months in jail, up to $1,000 fine, and up to 5 years of 5 years of probation, or none of the above or all of the above. The jurisdiction would be the Youngstown Municipal Court. The court may also order the wild animal, livestock, poultry transferred to an appropriate zoological or similar facility. So it confers jurisdiction to dispose of any animals humanely with the court. And if not practical, they may order it humanely destroyed by a qualified veterinarian. So the code did contemplate the humanity involved, the penalty, and the disposition.
Need a
Chair?
follow-up?
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to hear about that portion of the criminal code, because in my, not with my word in particular, but just in general, one of my concerns about permitting these things is under the zoning, how we would enforce it, because it always takes so long, it seems, when it's under zoning. So the process is a lot more drawn out than when things are done through the criminal system, frankly.
Well, and I, if I may, through the chair, I think the zoning code is meant to cause conformity and to create that conformity throughout. So when we're talking typically about zoning violations, we're not talking about necessarily things like this that need to be immediately addressed. And that's why I anticipate that's why this was included in the criminal code, for just those reasons that you said, that we have an immediate issue that we have to address.
Thank you.
So I think we can pretty much, in my opinion, leave the code the way it is and enforce it the way it is. It's already on the books. It already makes sense. Dana, I'm sorry, Anita.
To the chair, like I said, I was just want to be able to give Hunter some direction, and just from all of us. So that was just my opinion, that I would like to see his committee taken to that consideration, that 25 or 30 foot setback thing all the way around, so that it's not set up on a postage stamp size property. And secondly, Hunter, it was brought to my attention that chickens aren't birds, but they do flap their wings and can hop over top. So ask them in the future if they could put some sort of cover on top of the coop itself.
Mhm.
That's just my input. That's all.
Jimmy, were you going to say something?
Yeah, to the chair. Didn't Dana say there was a conflict in two different ordinance or two different codified that the Hunter was speaking about, and what we were doing from the health department, the way she was looking at it, and that one said that, we have to be agricultural in order to have it, and Hunter said that we can have it everywhere. That it didn't have to be agricultural. At least that was the perspective I have. So I don't know how we can leave it as it is when it seems to be I'm confused that it's conflict somewhere in there. Maybe I just misunderstood it all. If I can get some clarification on that, leaving it as it is, what does that mean? Leave it as is.
That question is for me, Jimmy?
No, I wanted to get a clarification. Am I confused when I just listened to, there was two different perspectives as to what it is, Hunter was saying that as it is right now, the law says that you can have it everywhere, and Dana says that the actual reading of the ordinance says agriculture, which will eliminate a lot of properties that you just reduce it down to just a few. I don't know how many agricultural zones are in the city, but and I'm sure that the lion's share of them would be in my ward. But just the same, though, some of my constituents I definitely know it's residential, and they desperately want chickens. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I was under the understanding that one was an opinion, like to allow like variance, and one was actually code. And that's why I said we should leave it the way it is, code. But if the code actually conflicts itself, then yeah, that's something we need to address. Mike?
I agree with Councilman Hughes. Jimmy summarized what I was going to say. Actually, I think Dana said there was a conflict. Dana, how do we remedy the conflict? I guess or take one out, or
if I may, through the chair.
Dana?
In direct response to Councilman Ray. So right now, as the code stands, it would, in statutory construction and legislative intent, it is clear that we have two differing opinions, because council did pass the zoning code. They also passed a criminal code. So we have two different codes with two different authorities granted. So we have to make a choice as to how we want to proceed going forward and make them consistent. We can still keep a criminal code and a zoning code provision that addresses this, as long as they say the same thing, as long as the parameters are the same. So if council wanted to do property size restrictions and those type of restrictions, they could do that in both. If they wanted to keep it agricultural, they could do that in both. It's really up to the substance of that is up to council. We will obviously draft it in the law department to make sure that it is consistent in both. I think what's really important in our criminal code is the function that the health commissioner plays, because that report would address a lot of the issues as it relates to residential properties, if that was something we wanted to do. If it were agricultural or farming, the health commissioner would obviously just be confirming that they are complying with whatever other regulations there are regarding that. So I think that we could draft ordinances that are consistent with each other in both codes so that people know where to look. A lot of times our codes create this confusion because we have different types of codes. So we look in housing, but we fail to look in the other codified ordinances and vice versa. So we would just like to make that consistent with whatever direction council gives us.
Dana, do you know why it conflicted at the time when council passed these ordinances? Were they trying to allow chickens, but at the same time have an enforcement piece in case it got out of hand? Or I don't understand why.
Well, I think that it happened at two different times. I think that this original ordinance was updated in 2009, the criminal ordinance. And I think that was, I wasn't privy or party to that, but if memory serves, we had problems with people running around with chickens on their property. There were no permits and there was no mechanism for that. I think as urban farming, urban gardens and those type of ideas took root in cities similar to ours, and the code was being developed, because I think that code was sometime around 2013, the zoning code. I think that everybody thought that might be a good idea to give people the opportunity to do that if the neighbors agreed and those type of things, and council wanted to give them a permit. So I think it's an evolutionary process that took place where society's views on these things evolved. But that's really just speculation on my part. But having remembered in the prosecutor's office, we did have issues, and they were predominantly on the east side, in places where it tended to be a little more rural. I don't recall having a lot of issues with unpermitted chickens anywhere else in the city back then. But again, as time has gone on and I've gotten older, my memory's not quite as sharp as to what happened in 2009, but that's the sense I have of that.
Yeah, I see Nikki, Nita, and Hunter. Nikki, you want to go?
Through the chair, thank you. Actually, I was going to say exactly what Councilman Ray and Councilman Hughes said. I just wanted clarity on what, we know what the conflict is, but which way did we want to go? Are we saying that it's only going to be in farming and agricultural, or are we going to add residential to this? So just clarity for the planning on the side of the Planning Commission, which way we wanted to go.
Nita?
Through the chair. So Dana, can you prepare legislation that could incorporate the two to make them not in conflict? And also, depending upon how the committee, other members of the committee feel, put in the setback restrictions as well.
Yes, I can prepare whatever legislation. If I could just have specifics as to what restrictions or what process we want to use. It doesn't have to say, we can develop the process and probably continue the conditional use, but if whatever parameters you want, if that's in the request for legislation letter, I can make sure that I do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get to Hunter, I think Mike Ray is in favor of chickens, I think. Hunter?
Through the chair, I'm not sure that that's a permitted use to show that background, Councilman Ray. I would have to take that before the Planning Commission. Thank you. First of all,
I something to crow about now.
I appreciate that very much. I would, on behalf of the Planning Commission, I would appreciate the law departments looking at the two codes and seeing where there's conflict and identifying those so the council can remove the conflict and we have some clear sailing. Right now, the code does call for agriculture as distinct from general agriculture as distinct from urban agriculture, and general agriculture is pretty well restricted. I'm not sure how many zones we actually have in the city of Youngstown, but urban agriculture is generally permitted conditionally. And it puts on the burden of the Planning Commission in terms of making a decision that we determine that the property complies with the requirements of the redevelopment code, as the applicant has met any state and federal permitting requirements, and the issuance of the variance will not interfere with the health and safety of the community or create a nuisance to adjoining landowners. I think the Planning Commission relies on the Health Department to determine the health and safety situation. But we will need the guidance on this question of nuisance, which is prospective. Somebody comes in and says, I'm not going to cause a problem, and it may cause a problem, it may not. We'd be glad to look into a setback requirement to see what that means in terms of what areas would be included and excluded from livestock, from basically chickens, ducks, and rabbits. And then the council can make a determination whether that is in keeping with your intent, that the basic lot area be large enough to accommodate this use without creating nuisances, particularly noise nuisances, possibly also attracting wild animals, stray animals, that creates problems for the neighbors. But I think one step, Dana, would be to look at the two codes and see where there's conflict and recommend to council how to reconcile the two of them. And then for us to look at the Councilman Davis's request, 20, say a nominal 25-foot setback, and see what it means to the typical lots in different parts of the city.
Is that the end of discussion on this matter, or is this committee's wish for the planning, health department, law department to work together to come up with a code that's going to be appropriate throughout the entire city, and then come back to the zoning committee with that legislation?
To the chair.
Nita?
Yes, that is what I would like to see take place with the law department and with, well, let's start with the law department, because I think that's where our conflict is, in the law. So, and that would be my direction to Attorney Lance.
Okay, Jim?
If Neat was finished, will you finish, Neat?
Hmm?
All right, through the chair. I was also concerned with misdemeanor 1 penalty, 6 months in jail and 4 or 5 years, something probation. And also, with this, I don't know, I think we should look at that penalty. Should it be that extreme? I don't know. I think it is, but and is this the same category with the bees for those of my constituents that do have the beehives, and that they fall up under this same guidelines, this code? All of this is with the beekeepers as well. If Hunter or somebody can give me that answer.
Dana?
I believe so, but I'll check with the code.
If I may, the city criminal code does not address in this section the bees. So in this section, just so I'm clear with, so Hunter, you understand what I was indicating. Our code right now says that you can only have chickens if the area where they're to be kept is zoned for farming or agricultural purposes. So that's where the conflict lies. If when you indicated in the redevelopment code that you could have it as a conditional use or a permitted use. So that's what we have to determine if we're changing that. So I just need direction from council as to if you want to expand that or allow a variance to be issued for them to have this for agricultural purposes, or how we want to proceed that way.
To the chair, the code, as I read it, talks about under commercial uses, agricultural and animal related, and has 2 categories: agricultural general and agricultural urban. And agricultural general is like farming. Agricultural urban is coop houses, small chickens, rabbits. So I think those are permitted across the board as conditional uses. The straight agriculture, traditional agriculture is limited to specific mapped areas. So there, and the 2 codes need to be aligned. Is agriculture in the criminal code, does that incorporate urban agricultural and general agriculture?
Well, in the plain reading, it would be any agricultural purpose, because it says it's zoned for farming or agricultural purposes. So that where the problem lies in the criminal code is that it names those and doesn't give the authority for any exception. So if we're saying that we want an exception, we can build that into the criminal code. So that's where the conflict lies, because you said that there are conditional uses where people can have
Right. Again,
throughout the
that's,
city in residential areas or otherwise.
and that's exactly what the zoning code says. That
Okay.
There's an urban agricultural as a subset of agriculture. There's general agriculture and urban agriculture. General agriculture is mapped to specific geographies. Urban agriculture is more generally more available as a conditional use. So the code is ambiguous. The criminal code, is it referring to both? Is it referring only to general agriculture? The planning commission is charged with trying to interpret the zoning code or the development code, and that's what got us to this point. I was unaware of the criminal code aspects of this.
Right. And that's just where our conflict lies, because it either has to be limited to this farming or agricultural purposes. And the plain reading of that would then include any agricultural zoning or farming. But it's broader.
What I'm hearing you saying is notwithstanding what the zoning code says. Well, notwithstanding what the zoning code says about urban agriculture, you're saying that group is unpermitted by the criminal code.
It's only permitted in those areas. So, yeah. So
the zoning code opens a class of agriculture widely across the city. The criminal code says it's in specific zones that are mapped, correct?
Right, but the criminal code wouldn't allow for variance because it would have to be so we get into that. So basically, we just have to know what council wants, and we can draft language that keeps it consistent.
Exactly.
I think Nita got a question she want to interject in here.
No, go ahead. I see Nikki's hand up first.
Nikki.
Through the chair, thank you. I guess I'm a little bit, I just need some clarity on who, because I heard the law department, the planning commission and the health department to come together. What are we coming together to propose to council whether or not we're including residential in this 507.17, or are we proposing to, who's making that decision? And then second, Councilman Hughes mentioned bees, and under the, I guess, general definition here in 505.17, under livestock, it does mention bees here. So I just wanted to make sure I said that. But for us, I just want to know who's making that decision.
Nita.
To the chair, let me clarify what I want the law department, because it's about the law, to prepare the necessary legislation. And we will give her, the direction right today. But it's going to be the law department that's going to prepare the legislation. Due respect, it's just the law department that would prepare the legislation.
So, Nita, basically, council or this committee wants to allow chickens. We just need to clarify how we're going to allow chickens and make a distinction between that criminal code and whether it be residential agriculture or commercial agriculture, correct?
Through the chair, I have a copy of 505.17. I don't know what Hunter's talking about. So I don't know. I don't have a copy of that to even take to know what it is. To the law department, make it work. I mean, it sounds kind of funny when I say that, but I want to see these things not in conflict. I would like to see it so that there be minimum requirements. And for my personal taste, I wouldn't want a chicken anywhere in the city of Youngstown, but that's not my constituents' wish. Some of them want them, some of them don't. And I'd like for the zoning for Hunter's committee to review it and then pass it on to us to vote upon it. If that's clear enough. My personal wishes is not, I would have none, but I believe that the citizens of Youngstown should have the opportunity to make that appeal. So
we want to whittle this down to, we want to allow chickens under the code without the conflict.
Allow the use.
Okay.
Is that the correct term, Hunter? Conditional use?
Yes.
To allow us to consider the conditional use, not that it's a preset that everyone has the right to it, but they can request it. And then we, at a later, on an individual basis, vote yes or no.
So it's basically he's coming down the house cleaning and us cleaning up our codes.
Just clean up the legislation.
Okay. Dana, is that clear? Is everybody clear on what we're doing?
Yes.
All right. Well, I don't think we have to make a motion on anything at this point. We set a date for the next zoning meeting, come back and discuss the new legislation. And in the meantime, council, this committee, health department, planning,
Motion to adjourn?
second.
Good day.
Adjourn.